My name is Julie Courtnage and I'm the Executive Director of the Mandela Mining Precinct. Welcome to the Mine My Past podcast. We are going to be doing a series of podcasts from the Mandela Mining Precinct talking about our research, our development and our innovation in mining extraction. You might be wondering, why on earth are we starting a technical mining podcast with a short view into communication? When you think about it, communication defines our lives. Words define our lives. And in so doing, they actually define our relationships. Think about the diversity of people with whom we work in mining. Diversity of ideas, diversity of understanding, diversity of education, diversity of cultures. And there is a theory that the person with the most flexible communication will be the person who's most successful in life. And words truly create our worlds. When you think about it, every idea, every innovation, every new breakthrough started as a thought in somebody's mind. What is a thought? It's a word. So the words in our thoughts, we quite literally translate into the reality that we create. And so if we are to modernize mining, if we are to be inclusive, if we are to engage with everybody on an equitable footing, we need to know how to communicate. And in this session, I'm simply going to share some of my understandings, some of my learnings, particularly in my previous life as a professional coach and as a lecturer on ethics and governance and communication. And it's really about showing how you are the leader in your life to create your legacy through your words. I think one of the biggest fallacies is that little saying, "Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words can never harm me." Words can really do harm, but the flip side of that is words can really build people up. So if we're looking at communication, what do you think? Obviously you can't respond to me, but just in your mind, if I tell a colleague to do something, is that communication? Some people would say yes, but it isn't. Communication is a two-way or a multi-way process, and genuine and effective communication hasn't happened until both parties or all parties have the same understanding. So although I can talk at you, that's not necessarily communication. And one of the wonderful things to realize about effective communication is that there are senders and receivers. And everything we say, everything we hear, is filtered through our own experiences, our own values, our own belief systems, our own perceptions. And so the sender will filter what they are saying through those filters, and the receiver will filter what they're saying through their through their own filters as well. And when you think about that multicultural, diverse world of mining, imagine the differences in the beliefs, the values, the understandings, the perceptions. One of the really useful exercises that I've found is, whether you want to do it or do it with your team, is to take a little excerpt out of your sustainable development report perhaps, or your company financial report, and ask your team to rewrite that paragraph as though they were writing it for, let's say, children in grade 5, and write it as though they were trying to convey that message to the board and ask for money, and see the difference. It's really important for effective communication that we meet people where they are. This is about impact, not ego. And so, especially in mining, where there are so many technical terms, it's science, it's engineering, it's human capital, it is environmental issues, it is even policy. And if we want to convey the importance of mining or look for solutions even to mining problems, we need to be sure that our audience and our message is aligned. When you think about it, there's a lot of different ways of communicating. There's the obvious verbal and non-verbal, and I'm just going to take some time to run through some of those things. So depending which statistician you believe, anywhere between 83% and 97% of effective communication is non-verbal. So keep that in mind. We're going to talk about technology later. In verbal communication, there's a number of factors that you need to consider to make your communication effective. The first is tone of voice. Let's take this sentence. Ntombi, come to my office at 10 o'clock, I want to talk to you. Now, think about, Ntombi, come to my office at 10 o'clock, I'd like to talk to you. What's the message? Completely different. And I'm using that person with permission. And I know you can cut that out. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Okay. So the tone of the words that you are using must match the message that you are trying to convey. Obviously, in mining, we have some very difficult things to communicate, whether it's equipment breakdown or injuries. And you need to make sure that your tone matches that message. The second verbal aspect of communication is volume. A lot of people think that you really get people's attention when you talk very loud. The reality is, in today's world where there is so much noise, we tend to tune out the loudness. And there's a lovely saying, if you want to capture someone's attention, whisper. Try that the next time you're in a busy meeting and you can't get somebody's attention or you can't get the meeting to come to order. Just start talking very quietly. And honestly, fear of missing out is a real thing. And generally, people do quieten down to hear what is being said. So that's volume. Obviously, it must be pitched at an appropriate place, in the room, in the space. The next thing we should consider in verbal communication is the pace at which we talk. I know I have a tendency to run along and just speak very, very fast because I've got 15 different parallel processes in my brain and I want to convey the message and I get very excited. But that's not always appropriate. And we do need to allow people to process what we're saying. So, and also matching the message again. If you are conveying difficult or bad news, it is better to speak slowly because it gives people time to absorb the shock that they will be feeling. Whether it's about finances or performance or an injury or I'm not going to meet this deadline. Rather speak slower to give the person time to absorb so that they can respond rather than react. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Then the pitch at which you speak. And unfortunately, ladies, the reality is that apparently in the human brain, higher pitched voices do not garner the same attention as deeper voices. Now you can train your voice, and I'm not saying that we should all speak like this, but the reality is we don't all have to speak like this. And I'm being ridiculous just to make a point. We can consciously work at lowering our pitch to a point that is comfortable to ensure that we are heard. And this is not about being inauthentic. Be who you are and recognize that different people will receive you in different ways, and be adaptable and be able to go, well, I'm going to change my communication. So I've done a lot of speaking to, whether it's boards, lecture theatres, school children, working with non-profit organizations. And obviously, I mean, right now, I don't know my audience, so I am just speaking. But if I was speaking to a group of 6-year-olds, I would be doing it very differently to if I was speaking to a board meeting. So that's the pitch, and that can be trained. Let's get into that non-verbal communication. Non-verbal communication is about things like body language. But one must be cautious when interpreting things. Again, going back to the diversity of people and cultures and languages and backgrounds and even birthplaces of those with whom we engage in the mining industry. There's a lot of social norms in different places in the world that can be interpreted differently if you are in a different country. So let me share one story. When I was facilitating a meeting with a group of senior directors, and as we are trained to do when you are trained in communication, you try and make eye contact at all time. And 2 hours into a 3-hour session, this one gentleman raised his hand. He was not from South Africa. And he said, "Julie, please will you stop looking me in the eye, because in my culture it's regarded as profoundly disrespectful." And so that was fine. From that point on, I was able to shift that. But now, imagine that you didn't know that, and you're looking at a person and they're constantly looking away and constantly looking away. We are taught to think that if someone can't meet your eye, they are untrustworthy. And so we have to be very careful when interpreting non-verbal cues. So body language is really important in that we unknowingly, unconsciously pick it up. And when our verbal communication and our non-verbal communication don't match, that's when we lose people. That's when we lose their engagement. That's when we can break trust. And so let's look at some of the typical body language issues. So smiling. It doesn't mean you have to be happy all the time, but unless it is a really serious topic or a very difficult topic, smiling is obviously a natural way to go for some people. Sometimes you have to teach yourself to smile while you're speaking. Let's now look at posture. Maybe it's a generational thing, but certainly my generation, I'm in my 50s, we were taught to stand up straight, and I'm sure there's even somewhere a photograph of me with books on my head to get me to stand up straight. But just looking at my posture now, what does this communicate to you? Lack of interest, maybe lack of confidence, lack of care, don't know, certainly not engaging. Simply sitting up straight and you will grab someone's attention and you will look interested, and, by the way, you will feel more engaged. If you're in mining, you are going to have to present to somebody at some stage. We have to engage multiple people. Sometimes we have to talk to audiences, be it at a conference or something like that. And we all get nervous. We all get a little bit worried. Do I know what I'm talking about? Especially when we're conveying things about research, development and innovation, because we're presenting new ideas. And new ideas can be met with a lot of resistance. Now, you may or may not know of this person, Dr. Amy Cuddy. She is an expert in communication and body language. And I'm about to show you something that everybody can do in those few moments before you go on stage or in front of the board meeting or out in front of a wide audience in a public meeting. I do recommend you don't do this in front of the audience. Your posture affects your brain and your emotions and your confidence. And what Dr. Cuddy calls the Superman pose is a real way of changing your body chemistry to build your confidence. And what that is you stand with your feet slightly apart, you put your hands on your hips, and you stand up completely straight for a minimum of about 30 seconds. See why you don't do this in public, because it looks really ridiculous. But what this does is it actually increases testosterone levels, which calms you down, makes you feel confident, and allows you to convey the message that you are trying to convey with a lot more conviction and certainty. When we're thinking about nonverbal communication, it's also really important not to take so-called cues in isolation. I'm sure you've heard the comment that if someone touches their nose, they might be lying. Well, yes, they might also have an itchy nose. The thing is to take the full feeling and the amount of cues into consideration, also recognizing cultural differences. So take something as simple as a handshake. I cannot tell you how many times I've had my hand practically broken by someone trying to prove a point. I've been in the mining industry for 35 years. It's come a long way. But in those days, and unfortunately even still, we do get those sorts of issues happening. But when you think about a handshake, how long do you hold a handshake? Do you put your hand over? Just to share with you, if you shake someone's hand and you put your hand over their hand, that is supposed to show dominance and power. I prefer a firm handshake and release. But remember, in some cultures, you shake a hand and then you hold on to the hand. And so one of the very important things to do, especially when engaging with people who are different from us in any way, is to do some research, particularly if you're going into a different country. So for example, in some international cultures, it is vital that anybody who is at a subordinate level to the CEO walks slightly behind the CEO. And so it is important to understand those things before going into a new culture. This is particularly important, for example, with exploration geologists, because they are the ones who engage with people first. They are the first face of a mining company. And if they don't understand the people with whom they are going to interact, it could create grave misunderstandings. So let's think about technology in relation to nonverbal communication. All of us are on Teams, on Zoom, we're emailing, we're WhatsApping, we are Instagramming, we are Xing. Now, if between 83 and 97% of our communication, effective communication, comes through body language, we are losing a vital, enormous portion of content of our communication. And this is where it's very important then that you use your words to get the emotion that is missing or the intention that is missing from your body language. So think about email etiquette. The worst thing, personal gripe, is to get an email that says "hi" in the subject line. For business communication, it's very much more effective, and think about this because this is non-verbal communication, to say, for example, Q2 report for review by Wednesday the 16th, close of business. In that one subject line, you have conveyed exactly what you need for the person. But then greet them. If you're in an ongoing conversation with someone on Teams or on an email, obviously it's not "Dear Julie" every single time. But the first time you engage with someone, greet them. It's just courtesy. And this is where one has permission to use maybe slightly more emotive words than we normally would in business, because we need to convey that the understanding that our words could be taken in a different way. So for example, let's take that example I used earlier for the verbal communication. "Dear Brian, please come to my office at 10 o'clock. We need to chat. Regards, Julie." Now, there is no tone there. That could be interpreted in multiple ways. Here's how we could make it a little bit less worrying for the person who's coming to an office at 10 o'clock. "Dear Brian, hope the week's treating you well so far. I've got a couple of ideas I'd like to throw around. Can you make it at 10 o'clock in my office? Cheers, thanks, Julie. Completely different messaging. And so the purpose in effective communication is to prepare the person for the communication, as well as help them understand what it is you are trying to convey. So again, the sender and the receiver will not necessarily get the same message. There's a variety of skills that we can use to make our communication more effective, whether it's verbal, non-verbal, written, or spoken. One of the best skills that we can develop is empathy, which literally means to put ourselves in the other person's shoes. And the skill that is most useful to develop empathy, which develops connection, by the way, and rapport, is a skill called active listening. What is active listening? When you are in a conversation with someone, how many times do we, in the back of our heads, are we running through the answer before the person has even finished speaking? That's passive listening. And we are trying to prepare the answer so that we can get our point across before, very, very quickly. And we're guilty of this, particularly in business. Active listening is when you listen to understand rather than to respond. And that requires us to keep quiet. I still have a terrible tendency to interrupt people, and that is really arrogant. It's a characteristic that I work very hard at not practicing. And the reality is I just get so excited about things that I tend to sometimes get a little bit like a kid and jump in, but it is profoundly disrespectful. And active listening requires that we try and tap into the person's tone, if you can see them, their body language, and really try and understand what it is they are trying to convey. And we don't have to jump in immediately with a response. It's okay to say, give me a second to absorb that, and be quiet. We tend to be uncomfortable with quiet, and we need to develop that skill of the occasional pause to think before we respond, because that also is a demonstration of emotional intelligence, which the more we practice it, the better our communication will be. So active listening is a really, really good skill. I'd like to spend just a little time talking about difficult conversations. What constitutes a difficult conversation? It's usually something about a tough subject, and it might be difficult because you're scared of raising the issue. It might be tough because you want to ask for a raise, but you're not particularly confident on the way it'll be received. It might be conveying bad news. It might be part of a disciplinary process. It might be we didn't make the production targets. It could be anything. And there's no judgment around what makes a difficult conversation. Different things are difficult for different people. But luckily, there is a very beautiful little tool set that you can use to help you with difficult conversations. And as I talk through it, it's going to sound terribly stilted and terribly artificial, but the more you practice it, the better you will be. So the reality in a difficult conversation is the first step is to recognize the other person's emotions and acknowledge it. So it might be, I can hear that you're upset. I can hear that you're anxious. It seems to me like this is a very important issue to you. Those are the kinds of things, to just acknowledge the other person's emotions and feelings in your perception and own it. Own it. The second step is to state the facts of the situation. So imagine someone runs into my office and dumps a pile of reports on my desk and says, Julie, I need those processed by 3 o'clock this afternoon. And I can't do it. What I could say to them is, I recognize that this is very important to you. I have 7 other tasks assigned to me by person A, B, C, D, E, F, G ahead of this request. Please advise. So you can state the facts in that way. Then what you do is you make a commitment. So in that situation, that little example, I could say, I can deliver these to you by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Is that okay? And then the most important thing is follow through. Make sure you deliver those things by 10 o'clock, or if you're not going to, communicate that ahead of time. So I'm just going to summarize those difficult conversation steps. It's acknowledge the other person's feelings as you perceive them, state the facts of the situation, make a commitment to rectify or address whatever it is they need done, and then follow through. Also, never be afraid to walk away from a difficult conversation. It's perfectly okay if emotions are flying high and you can't get agreement to say, listen, we're not getting anywhere. Let's take a 5-minute break. Let's go get coffee. Why don't we go out and get coffee? So it's perfectly okay to do that as well. And it's not like this is a magic wand. It's not going to solve all your problems. But I'll share a story that one of my clients shared with me many years ago. The phone rang and it was my client, and I picked it up and he said, Julie, it worked. And I'm going, your computer, your car. But what had happened was he had had a client phone him, furious, almost crying in anger. And he did this 4-step process. And he said by the end of the conversation, the woman was laughing. So practice it. It really is a very, very powerful tool. The last item I'm going to talk about is report writing, because no matter where you fit in mining, you are going to write reports for somebody at some stage. What's the difference between a report and an email, if you think about it? There's a lot. So it's the content, it's the intention, and very much the style. Report writing style often depends on the culture of the company in which you are working, as well as the purpose of the report. So let's look at what reports are actually used for. When you think about it, reports are used to record facts. In our environment in research, development and innovation, obviously we are trying to convey what it is we have discovered, uncovered. So we collect facts in reports. Usually we are trying to transfer a message. Usually reports also state what needs to be done or the results or an outcome of something. And very often, reports are used as a basis for future decision making. So when you think about that, reports are really, really important. And there's a few general things that we can talk about when it comes to reports. Err on the side of formality. And I'm talking here in the mining sector. This doesn't necessarily count for if you're in advertising or marketing. But for mining, err on the side of formality. To the best of your ability, don't use jargon. And I know it's very, very difficult, especially in highly technical reports. But if you are going to use very specialized words, make very sure that you have either an appendix or right up at the front of the report, you have a list of definitions as well as abbreviations. Because my goodness, do we like to use abbreviations? And different abbreviations mean different things in different contexts. So in your report, make very sure that you've got that. A good report has a table of contents. Beg your pardon, a good report has a title. Believe it or not, people sometimes leave out the title of reports. So it's a title, it's a table of contents, it's definitions, it's abbreviations. Unless your report is really, really short, do an executive summary. And ideally, executive summaries don't cover process. So they don't go into the what we did or how we did it. It might be one statement of this trial was carried out on the following date at the following mine site, with the following permissions. The results show that. So you go right to the impactful thing so that someone who hasn't got time to read the 57 pages in one page gets the most important message. A good report uses headings, but there is a caveat. The limit, I believe, of what you should use in terms of heading numbers is 3 levels. And by the way, numbering of headings really is important to locate people in the report. So you can have a 1, a 1.1, and a 1.1.1. Don't go beyond that. Beyond that, use bullet points. You may have seen reports that go down to about 7 decimal places. You lose track after 3 or 4. So ideally limit it to only 3 levels of headings. The tradition, the norm is changing as to whether you should use justified or left aligned. I believe that the more modern way is to use left aligned, not justified. I'm old school. I do justified because it's really neat. The other thing is a really judicious use of graphs, pictures, photographs, because that old saying of a picture tells 1,000 stories or 1,000 words, I don't quite remember it, but make sure that the graphics that you are using are appropriate to the subject matter. So for example, if you are reporting on safety and you are documenting injury statistics, that report is not going to be covered in pastel, pretty pink butterflies. I'm being ridiculous to make a point. Your graphs must be clearly readable, muted colors, because you're talking about people's health and well-being. On the other hand, if you're sharing really good news in a report, sometimes it can be okay to introduce a little bit of color, but understand the formality or otherwise of your organization and what your audience needs. And I think in conclusion, that's just a few ideas. In conclusion to this whole session on communication, know what it is you want to convey and know who your audience is. Know how you want to convey it and match those 3, because then you have more chance of the message sent being the message received. I look forward to the rest of the team developing more podcasts and sharing them with you on this new channel. Thank you and take care.